Hey, it's Dave from CG Shortcuts. Today we're helping you pick the best computer for working with Cinema 4D. This tutorial was brought to you by CG Shortcuts Pro membership, where members get access to Cinema 4D, Octane and Redshift courses, project files, models, materials, discounts, and even a private Facebook group, as well as lots more. Become a member today and take your Cinema 4D skills to the next level. Visit cgshortcuts.com/membership. Now let's get back to the tutorial. We get asked a lot about this, so we're finally making a video to help you choose a computer for Cinema 4D. We'll presume you're using it for traditional motion graphics work based around C4D and After Effects, but we'll also mention what to look for if you're using popular plugins as well. We've broken it down into 5 main considerations, which we've listed here in order of importance. So let's go through each section and help you find what to look for. Starting with the single most important part of any new computer, the graphics card or GPU. Basically, the GPU or graphics processing unit is designed for parallel processing, which means it can process loads of tasks at once, unlike a CPU, which traditionally processes one task after another. And this makes the GPU perfect for handling high-resolution images, video, and animation, which is why it's number 1 on our list. As technology brings us closer to full real-time rendering, the GPU is really the key piece of hardware that's going to make the greatest impact on your work. So here's why you need a good GPU. Firstly, and probably most importantly, you're going to get much faster renders and previews while you work, which means your whole workflow is going to be much more interactive. Presuming you're using a GPU optimized render like Redshift or Octane, when you adjust your materials or lights, the changes will be almost instant. This is super important because not only is it going to allow you to work much faster, it also means you're going to have far more creative freedom. You can iterate your designs quickly and experiment with different looks with instant feedback. Without a good GPU, you might be stuck waiting several minutes to preview every little change, which is really going to put a limit on what you can create. Secondly, when you're ready to output your scene, your final render times are going to be much faster. And when it comes to speed, GPUs are super scalable. The better the GPU, the faster the render. And with multiple GPUs, you can increase render times exponentially. This is obviously great because it means you can get your renders done faster and in front of your clients much sooner. With a good GPU, you'll also be able to take advantage of GPU hardware acceleration, where the GPU is used in place of the CPU for various tasks to dramatically increase calculation time. A few examples of this in Cinema 4D would be GPU accelerated Pyro and Cloth simulations, which is much faster to calculate, and plugins like Nexus and RealFlow also take advantage of the GPU for simming particles and liquids. And even After Effects takes advantage of GPU acceleration during rendering and for the calculation of many of the effects. So now that we know why we need a good GPU, here's what to look for. You'll want to get a GPU with as many CUDA cores as possible because renderers like Redshift and Octane are designed specifically to take advantage of the CUDA parallel computing architecture. Unfortunately, CUDA is technology created by NVIDIA, which means you'll need an NVIDIA GPU to make the most of your GPU renderers. However, the developers of Redshift and Octane have recently announced limited compatibility with some AMD and Apple integrated graphics cards. But because NVIDIA has really been at the forefront of the GPU rendering revolution, we'd strongly suggest sticking with NVIDIA. And we'll give you some suggestions on exactly which GPUs you should go for at the end of the video. You'll also want to grab a graphics card that has plenty of VRAM, which is memory specifically designed for GPU. More VRAM means you'll be able to handle larger scenes and you'll actually get faster rendering as well because VRAM stores graphics related data such as textures and geometry for easy access to the GPU, which in turn will lead to faster processing and rendering. And if you intend to use multiple monitors, you'll also need to make sure your GPU has the ports and enough VRAM to handle that as well. And your graphics cards will need at least 8 GB of VRAM for the newer 4K monitors. So that's the GPU. Let's move on to the next most important bit of hardware, the CPU or central processing unit. This little guy handles all the processing outside of what the GPU does. So it's in charge of day-to-day computer tasks, including running applications, managing files, and performing calculations. So there's really only one reason you need a good CPU, and that's for faster processing. Getting the best CPU you can afford is just going to make your computer run faster in general. Applications will run faster, file management is quicker, even web browsing can be aided by a good CPU. And when it comes to Cinema 4D, a lot of the tools and effects are still run primarily on the CPU. And this includes stuff you use every day, like the MoGraph module, particles, bullet dynamics, and even caching. So you'll definitely want to invest in a good CPU to keep C4D running nice and fast. When picking a CPU, you generally want to get one with as many cores as possible. A core is an independent processing unit within a CPU, each of which is capable of performing calculations independently, which means similar to the parallel processing capabilities of GPUs, more cores means you can make more calculations at the same time. And within cores, you have threads, which is a virtual way of dividing up tasks and making even more calculations simultaneously. So generally speaking, the more cores with the more threads, the better. And Cinema 4D and After Effects, among most software these days, are built to take advantage of multiple cores and multi-threading. Just keep in mind that some operations still rely heavily on single core performance. Which brings us to the next important thing to look for, the clock speed. This is a value in gigahertz that depicts the speed or frequency of the CPU. Again, the higher the value, the faster the CPU generally. So as a rule of thumb, go for a CPU with as many cores and threads as possible with the highest clock speed. Next we come to memory or RAM. This is also a super important part of any motion graphics computer. RAM is used to store data temporarily for quick access to the CPU or GPU for processing. And the more RAM you have, which is measured in gigabytes, generally means better performance for running multiple programs or running memory-intensive tasks. So more memory means you can have loads of different apps open at once. It also means you can have way too many browser tabs open as well, which I'm definitely guilty of. And when it comes to motion graphics software, RAM is especially helpful for storing simulation data, especially for more complex stuff like particles, liquids, and volumes. Without enough RAM, some simulations might not actually complete or just crash your computer, which has definitely happened to me before. RAM is also used to cache your animation in After Effects for playback and to store temporary information for various plugins. So it's super important for compositing as well. So try and get as much RAM as your budget permits, so you've got enough memory to calculate complex tasks and run all your apps. But also make sure you get fast RAM. DDR5 is currently the fastest type of RAM available, but also check the clock speed, which similar to the CPU is the frequency at which the RAM can send and receive data. Next up, but definitely not to be overlooked, is storage. We generate some pretty massive files while working in 3D. From scene files and textures to video files and image sequences, you're going to need a lot of storage space. And while you can definitely use external hard drives or cloud backups, you'll be kicking yourself if you neglect internal storage. We need to make sure we've got enough space to store our files locally, but it's also important to get fast storage, which means we can access those files faster. And it also means we can run the apps that are installed on our computer faster as well. So when choosing storage, you'll probably want to take a look at the size or capacity first. I usually go for at least a 1 terabyte internal drive to store my current projects and do all my backing up to cheap external drives or cloud storage. You'll also want to invest in a solid state drive or SSD over a regular hard drive. SSDs are not only faster for reading and writing, but they also have no moving parts, so they run quieter and last much longer than regular drives. Installing your operating system and applications to a solid state drive will also make your software load and run faster. And speaking of faster reading and writing, it's also a good idea to take a look at the data transfer rate of the hard drive as well, which is usually measured in megabytes per second. The higher the read and write speed, the better. Beyond that, there's a few other considerations as well. Once you've chosen your GPU, CPU, RAM, and SSD, you'll also need enough power to run everything. This is especially important if you have one or more high-end GPUs, which need a lot of power to run. And with a lot of power usually comes a lot of heat. So you'll also need to invest in suitable cooling to keep everything running at an optimal temperature. You'll also need a motherboard that can accommodate all the components you've chosen, as well as giving you the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and USB options you need. And keep in mind that some of the newer GPUs are absolutely massive. So you're also going to need a massive case that's going to fit everything in nice and snugly. So here's a full checklist of the steps you should take when choosing a computer. Step 1 is figuring out how much you can spend, and you should definitely do this first so you don't end up going over budget. This will also help you make decisions as you choose each component. Keep in mind that this is likely a long-term investment. You'll probably be using the computer for paid work, so it will eventually pay itself off. Plus, you'll probably get about 2 to 3 years use out of it before you need to upgrade again. And if you look after it, you should be able to get a good chunk of what you paid back when you go to sell it secondhand. You could also break the price down into a monthly cost to help justify the budget. If you go for a budget of $3,000, for example, that's about $83 per month over 3 years. So sometimes it can help to look at it that way instead. Next, you want to choose a GPU, which is the cornerstone of any Cinema 4D workstation. This is where the majority of the budget is going to be spent. So it's a good idea to check out the Redshift or Octane benchmarks so you can see which GPU performs best with the software, or compare the cost to performance ratio so you can get the best bang for your buck. And I'll leave a link to a few good resources for this down below. We recommend choosing from the NVIDIA RTX range for maximum compatibility with GPU renderers, and to get as many CUDA cores and as much VRAM as you can. And if you can afford it, multiple GPUs are a great option. Just make sure the rest of your system can accommodate that. Then you'll need to grab a CPU, which you can choose in much the same way as a GPU. Take a look at the benchmarking and comparison sites and try to get as many cores and threads as you can afford, while keeping clock speed nice and high as well. It's also worth taking a look at the Cinebench results to compare CPU performance directly in Cinema 4D. i7 and i9 Intel processors will do the job well, but these days we also like the cheaper Ryzen chips by AMD, which tend to deliver more for your money. Then moving on to memory, where you're going to need at least 32 gigabytes of RAM for a professional Cinema 4D workstation. You'll also need DDR4 or 5, which is currently the fastest type of RAM, also with a high clock speed. Then we suggest going with at least 1 terabyte of internal storage. Otherwise, you'll find yourself running out of space all the time, which is super annoying. Always go with the NVMe or PCLE solid state drives, which are much faster and much more reliable than the old hard disk drives. If your budget permits, it can also be a good idea to have multiple SSDs to store applications and project files on separate drives. But to save money, you can use cheaper external drives for archiving and backing things up. Just make sure that your work drive is nice and fast with good read and write speeds. Then, if you're building your machine yourself, you'll need to choose your power, cooling, motherboard, and case to accommodate everything you've chosen so far. You can consult a professional or use PCPartPicker.com to check if all the components you've chosen are compatible, but you won't need to worry about this if you plan to buy a pre-built machine, as this stuff will likely be chosen for you. So that brings us to the next question. Should you buy pre-built or build your computer yourself? We'd say if you know what you're doing, by all means, build your machine yourself. You'll end up saving a load of money, but you will need to put a bit of extra time into it. You could also do the next cheapest thing and source all of your parts, then hire someone to put the computer together for you. And if you don't have a tech-minded friend or colleague who could do this for you, you can easily hire someone via sites like Airtasker, who should be able to help you out for a reasonable fee. If you buy pre-built or semi-customized machine, you will be charged an assembly fee anyway, and the parts used will tend to include quite a bit of markup as well. So you really can't beat doing it yourself. Another question we get asked all the time is whether or not to go PC or Mac. So let's answer this once and for all as well. Keeping in mind that Apple is a luxury consumer brand, here are the pros and cons. Firstly, Apple is famous for great design, and because of that reason, some people find them easier to use. They tend to be higher quality and reliable, and tend to retain their value when it comes time to sell. Macs are also easy to buy, very secure because of their closed ecosystem, and support is very good if you're willing to pay for it. And the OS is great and very user-friendly. As for cons, Macs are very expensive compared to PCs. Customization is limited, which also makes upgrading quite difficult. There's also less software options and compatibility issues with newer technologies, especially in the field of rendering. Versus PCs, which are much cheaper, highly customizable and upgradable, equally as reliable, and in my experience tend to keep their value just as well as a Mac. Plus, there's way more software options available, and let's face it, when new technologies emerge, they are far more likely to arrive on PC than Mac, because there's a lot more PCs in the world than there are Macs, which is also why it took so long for GPU rendering to be Mac compatible. The cons do include the Windows operating system, which in our experience can be a bit frustrating at times. PCs are also said to be lower quality and less reliable, but as someone who's personally owned Macs and PCs, that hasn't been my experience. There's also limited support if you choose to build a PC yourself, as there's many companies and suppliers involved. And PCs can be a little more susceptible to viruses and malware, which can of course be mitigated with security software. And in Microsoft's defense, Windows Defender is actually pretty good. So you can take what you like from this, but it's probably obvious which option we prefer. For the simple fact that we can get the exact specs we want in a PC at a fraction of the price of an equivalent Mac, at this point we'd go for a PC every time. And with the money we'd save, we can literally buy most of the software we need as well. And while Windows is not our favorite operating system, at the end of the day, it's not that much different from Mac OS. So it's definitely manageable as well. But in saying that, Apple is doing some pretty impressive things with their M1 and M2 integrated chips, and it's definitely become much easier to use a Mac with GPU renderers. So if you're happy to pay the extra money, a Mac is still a decent option. So let's quickly cover one more question you might be wondering. Should you get a laptop or desktop workstation? And I think that's going to depend entirely on your situation. If you need to move around a lot, you can definitely pick up a laptop for Cinema 4D and GPU rendering work. It will need to be pretty high end though, and somewhat on the pricey side, as laptops are usually also more expensive than desktop machines. I personally used a laptop while freelancing prior to COVID, which was handy because I could bring my own computer to the office, which some clients do appreciate, but a lot of the time studios have a spare machine they'll want you to use anyway. So I'd say it's not really necessary, especially today when working from home is becoming more common. Plus, a laptop will never be as powerful as an equivalent desktop machine. If we compare an RTX 4090 laptop GPU with a 4090 desktop GPU, you can see from the stats that it's not even close. With the simple reason being, desktop GPUs are much bigger and can run much faster because desktop machines also have better options for cooling because they have more space. So just because you have a 4090 in your laptop doesn't mean you'll get anywhere near the performance of a 4090 desktop GPU. Plus, laptop components tend to be more expensive anyway, and much harder to customize. So only get a laptop if you really need it. Since COVID, I work exclusively from home now, so I've recently traded in my laptop for a fully spec'd custom desktop machine. And here's my specs if you're interested. My budget was about $2,500 US. And so far, it's been absolutely perfect for what I need. Plus, I should be able to sell it for at least half to 2/3 of what I paid for it in 2 to 3 years when it comes time to upgrade again. So that just about covers everything now. Let's finish up with a few recommendations. So for the student or hobbyist who might be learning Cinema 4D and eager to get started with GPU rendering, to save a bit of cash, you could consider something like this setup. And you could easily switch out some of the newer components with previous generation or second-hand parts if you wanted to save even more money, or upgrade the parts later down the line. Then we've got the professional MoGraph artist with an average budget who'll need a workhorse machine for paid work. Something like this should get you through for a few years and still leave some money left over for software, which, let's face it, seems to be getting more expensive every year as well. And finally, for the seasoned professional with a bit of extra cash to burn, you could pick up something like this if you wanted the highest specs and the most speed for your money. We have left out the latest generation of RTX cards because they're still very new and still pretty pricey at the moment. And you can get some really good deals on the older cards, which will still do the job quite nicely. But here's a bonus setup you could try if you really wanted to take those render speeds to the next level. We've also excluded multiple GPU options for the sake of this video, but if your budget permits, by all means, stack up on as many GPUs as you can. Just make sure you've got adequate power and cooling to accommodate them. You could also look at external GPU enclosures, commonly called eGPUs, for stacking up graphics cards, but that's probably a bit outside the scope of this video, but worth researching anyway if you do a lot of rendering. But that's about it for choosing a Cinema 4D workstation. We'll leave a bunch of links down below that should help you decide when you're ready to buy your next motion graphics computer. So if you found this video useful, or if you have any questions, let us know down in the comments. And if you want to learn more advanced tips and tricks in Cinema 4D, check out our ever-growing Cinema 4D Pro course, which is now free with CG Shortcuts Pro membership. More details at cgshortcuts.com/membership or the link below. That's it for now. I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching. If you found this video useful, give it a like so we know what to make next. Or just let us know what you need help with down in the comments. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button and click on the bell to be notified when we post new videos just like this one. You can find loads of CG training, assets and resources on our website, cgshortcuts.com, or become a member to access exclusive premium content. That's it for now. Here's a few more videos you might like.